Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and in my last video, I started taking a look at the Flat Earth movie called Level With Me. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that it didn't really have any arguments for Flat Earth. At the start it kind of tried to make an argument, but most of it was just talking about the Challenger disaster. Now obviously, if that disaster didn't actually happen, then it doesn't mean that the Earth is flat. And I don't think Flat Earthers realise that. Just because something needs to be a particular way for your conspiracy to be true, doesn't mean that it being a particular way means your conspiracy is true. But that aside, today we are back for part 2. See? I'm actually doing a part 2 this time. But before we get into it, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of people did criticise me for getting something wrong. Because I said that the Level movies were a comedy, and you're all right, they're actually a tragedy. Anyway, let's get into it.
Hello, I'm going to get one of these signed if that's alright. My name's Justin. Yes. Yes, with an IN.
Where are you from, Justin?
Orlando.
You're not far from
Not too far. No, I'm okay on a picture, but thank you. I do have a question though. Sometimes when we're watching the ISS footage, you'll see the astronauts sometimes connected to like wires and harnesses. Is that to keep them like in the frame during the broadcast, or what's the reason for that?
So, a lot of the time when these people talk about wires and harnesses and stuff, there is none. They're just seeing something that looks kind of like it could be, and so they're saying that that definitely is a wire. Another thing that they don't consider is that if the astronauts actually were using wires, the physics would be completely different to what we actually see. Things like the way that people's hair flows, or necklaces around people's necks floating. Anyway, let's see what their response was. I'm interested to hear.
I haven't actually. You mean while they're inside the shuttle?
Yeah, like when they're inside the ISS, sometimes during the feeds, the broadcast, you'll see kind of pulling on their belts or something like that.
I bet that is. I bet that is.
What did she just say? I legitimately could not understand a word of what she just said there. Maybe when she realised that she was talking to a flat earther, her brain just short-circuited and that's why she couldn't words for a few seconds. I wonder if that's how flat earthers recruit new people.
I have not personally seen that,
oh, really?
But I know that they try to be still when they're talking to someone, and then they usually try to release and do like a flip at the end or something.
I get the feeling that she hasn't realised what this person is trying to insinuate, but so far her answer seems fine.
Because I've seen the flip before and it almost looked like a foot was caught like inside something, but there was nothing really there. It was really strange. I didn't know if there was something to kind of like hold them in place or something.
We never had anything like that, but they may have learned over time that it was hard to stay still and they may have come up with something.
So with the footage being shown, I don't really see what the issue was. They did a flip and then they stuck out their foot, which stopped their flip. I think flat earthers are assuming that the other foot got caught on something, but from what I can tell, the knees were bent the whole way around. It was only at the end did one of the legs straighten out.
Did you ever think the public would find out that all the spacewalks were filmed underwater? Did you have any comment on that?
Well, we train underwater.
Oh, okay, but only training?
Only training.
Okay.
I do find it funny there how he probably thought that he had proof that everything is faked, and then she saw it and was like, no, that's training.
Most of the public have no idea that the ISS is located in an underwater neutral buoyancy lab in Houston, Texas.
She just told you that the underwater stuff is for training. It's not like they're keeping it a secret, because it's not a conspiracy. It's just training that they do there.
The space station footage that they trick us with is not travelling at 17,500 miles per hour above your head. It's all being filmed here on Earth.
I'd like to know then, what is the thing that goes over our heads at that speed? Because you can see the ISS go past you and you can measure its speed. So what is that?
An exact ISS replica underwater. Coincidence?
It is for training. Of course they're going to have a replica under the water of it because they need to know what they're going to be working on. What else do you think that they're going to be training with? Do you expect them to just swim around and that's their training?
It's a pretty simple process. Film your footage underwater, remove the water layer, add in your CGI Earth layer, and cast your spell.
Flat Earthers seem to have no idea of the complexity when it comes to that kind of stuff. They don't consider, what would the lighting be like? Is this lighting possible here on Earth? They make it seem like, you can just set up a few studio lights and you're good, but studio lights aren't the same as the sun out in space. Not to mention that there would also be a lot of complexity in making the weather that we see on the ISS match the weather here on Earth. because you can actually go outside and check the weather to see if it matches what is seen on the ISS. It isn't hard to do, it's just going outside. So here they're showing a whole lot of what they think is proof that it's filmed underwater, when in fact, one of those things was just a coolant leak. They really love to do this thing where anything that we see that isn't the spacecraft or the astronaut is a bubble, and that means that they're underwater or something. Not realizing, of course, that things like dust do exist. If you doubt that, you can find some here on Earth.
I don't believe that all these astronauts are living up there and doing all this.
Luckily, regardless of what you believe, astronauts are still in space. I know you don't like that, and will deny that, but I haven't seen any evidence that suggests that that's not what's happening.
Every single time that they do some type of live demonstration, you can see some type of faulty wiring, some type of glitch. They're literally being held up by strings.
So I find that this is a classic example of flat earthers thinking that they've got something whilst not looking at the wider implications of what they're saying. For example, the guy going past in the background that looks like he's being held up by a wire or a string or something, the thing that looks like a wire or a string is curved. That wouldn't be the case if it was holding him up. In another case, it kind of does look like a part of his top is being held up by a wire, but that's only a small section of it. It doesn't translate well to the rest of his top.
Think about this. They always have the women with long flowing hair. That would never be allowed.
They literally spray hairspray in their hair to make it look like their hair is floating in zero gravity.
So sometimes it kind of does look like that, but let's assume that you're right, that they are using hairspray or something that keeps their hair in place. It doesn't fully explain what we see. In one of the clips that was shown, her hair was bending a significant amount. Hairspray would not be able to allow for that amount of bending under gravity. The hair would just come down. Hairspray is not magic. It still has to conform to the laws of physics.
The International Space Station, brought to you by the same guys who faked 6 moon missions. Yeah, I believe that.
You know, the fact that the moon missions were not faked kind of throws a wrench into that line of reasoning, doesn't it? That argument is not going to convince someone like myself who doesn't believe that the moon missions were faked.
You know, I don't know exactly how they're videotaping themselves. They could be on one of those zero-G planes and, you know, doing it all in there.
Ah yes, the classic, I don't know how it's faked. I just know that it is fake. Like, you need a good reasoning for believing that it's fake, and a good way to do that is actually explain how it's faked. Especially if you're so smart that you're one of the few people on Earth that has managed to pick up that it's fake.
I'm not sure how they're doing it, but I don't believe it at all. It looks like a bunch of green screen fuckery. I don't believe that at all.
Okay, that was an interesting thing that they pointed out there. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but it does kind of look like a 3D model to me. The shading on it seems a bit too flat to be an actual physical object. It may be being used for some kind of visualization of something, with green being used as a contrasting background. But there is always the possibility that I may be wrong about that. After all, this is a clip that I have never seen before.
Running around in gorilla suits, going 17,500 miles an hour. There's supposedly micrometeorites, other satellites up there. They could die at any second, but they're running around, playing with water. They're always playing with water.
Yes, there are things that can go wrong, and they do need to be prepared for that, and they probably are prepared for that, to be honest. But it's a great way to show off certain things that normally we wouldn't see. Do you not listen to music in your car because at any second you could be hit by another car and die, and we can't have that kind of fooling around?
I know this looks like animation, but it's actually really real. I love this video because it looks like animation. It doesn't look real, but it is real.
It is very interesting that some things can look like an animation but actually be real. And that usually happens with things that we're not familiar with. That is why the ISS can look like an animation despite it being real.
People can watch all these fuck-ups and trickery by NASA and all these other space agencies, and all that goes out the window because they see a little light in the sky, and it's the ISS. Oh yeah, that's the ISS. That's all the proof they need, and everything else goes out the window.
Now, I haven't personally seen the ISS. I've seen some satellites going past. They went past in a little trail. But there are people that have photographed the ISS, or even taken video of the ISS, going past the moon. Or the sun. And it's not just the light in those videos, it's in a very, very distinct ISS shape.
I've seen a light go from horizon to horizon. There's many problems with that light. First, it's as bright as the sun. It's really bright. How is the ISS reflecting that light as bright as the sun back to me the whole way across? Is it made of mirrors?
So I can assure you, it is not as bright as the sun. If it were, you would not be looking at it for 12 minutes. Now it is rather bright, and the reason for that is because the sun is very, very bright. The ISS also has a lot of white on it. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at a white piece of paper out in the sun, but it is so bright that it is hard to look at. At the end of the day, given how bright the sun is, I don't find it really all that shocking that the ISS is as bright as it is.
So what is it? I was in communication with a NASA whistleblower, and he says that they have 5 B-2 bombers that they've remodified with some parts of them are transparent material with a thin metal struts that you really can't see. The bottom was overlaid with LEDs to match the color of the sun, and they use them in their base. 2 of them are in Alaska, and I forget where the other ones are, and they take turns doing these flybys.
So it seems that Dave really loves to talk about things that absolutely happened. So Dave, I was with your mum last night and she said that you're adopted. See, I can make things up too. That is to say, what Dave said there was totally made up. Maybe someone did contact him, but they certainly weren't from NASA.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I'd like to bring to your attention a potential fraud on an enormous scale happening in York County. There's now clear evidence of NASA using numerous methods to grossly mislead the public about astronauts being on the International Space Station. During interior ISS scenes from NASA's own live feed, the use of wires, harnesses, green screens, and virtual reality have been detected to achieve the appearance of a weightless...
Wait, this is a thing that happened. A flat earther went to some commission thing and tried to get an investigation opened into NASA. I mean, I can't fault them for trying to stand up for what they believe in, but they do need better evidence than what they've been giving.
I'm calling on the Brevard County Commissioners to open a full investigation into NASA's fraudulent practices and use of taxpayer dollars. It costs NASA $3 billion per year to operate the ISS, and if they don't have a darn good explanation as to why they're faking these videos, I and the public would like a darn good explanation as to where our tax money is going.
Well, if you want them to open an investigation into NASA, you better have darn good evidence, bucko. You may think that you've got good evidence, but from what I've seen, the only way that someone would actually believe that is by assuming that what the person is saying about that evidence is actually true. When you actually look at it and analyze it properly, you find out that, oh, things don't actually work like how the person is saying that they work.
Flat earthers pay attention. We're paying attention to NASA. We're paying attention to SpaceX.
I'm not sure that paying attention is quite the right word there. You're paying attention to what you want to pay attention to, and ignoring the stuff that is inconvenient.
Most people aren't, but yet they'll defend it. They'll defend it. They have no idea the Earth's supposed radius. They have no idea how far the sun is supposed to be according to NASA, 93 million. They don't know.
Now, I have always held the position that you don't need to memorize everything. I mean, when it comes to the radius of the Earth, if I even need that, I'm just going to search it up. I mean, going off memory, if I remember correctly, the radius of Earth might be something like 6,371 kilometers. I may be wrong on that, but it's not important that I memorize it. The same goes for something like pi. It's not important that I memorize pi. It's as long as I know how to use it, that's important. The application of knowledge is always way more important than the actual knowledge itself.
They have no idea, but they're defending it to the death. You know, once you start paying attention and have an open mind, pay attention.
What kind of open mind are we talking about here? Are we talking about mind being open to the possibility of being wrong, or are we talking about the mind being so open that your brains fall out? Also, when I hear some people say pay attention, what they mean is pay attention to the specific thing that I want you to pay attention to and nothing else. The following is official footage from NASA, SpaceX, and other space agencies. Everything you are about to watch was sold to the public as real and authentic. Please pay attention to what you are defending. So here we have a dramatic montage which is made significantly less dramatic by just cutting out the music. Now, I get that we're supposed to be paying attention here, but what exactly are we paying attention to? Because we're supposed to watch this and arrive at the conclusion that it's all fake. And that's all well and good, but presumably, if you watch it and don't arrive at that conclusion, then you must not have been paying enough attention. And if you weren't paying enough attention, well, then you're unintelligent. So you want to seem smart, so what's the best thing to do? Your best thing is to go, oh yeah, that looks like it is fake. It's easy to look at that kind of thing and go, yeah, I was paying attention, it looks really fake. Even though you don't have any rational reason for why, it's just that you're paying attention. and your attention tells you that it's fake, even though that's really what the flat earthers were wanting you to believe. It is a rather interesting strategy that they're going with.
That's the worst footage ever.
But can you actually explain why, beyond, oh, I was just paying attention and it looks fake?
But we do want to make sure that the American people understand that there's no need to panic. The president took this action, as I mentioned earlier, because the objects were indeed flying at lower elevation and they were in civilian airspace.
So this seems like that air balloon thing that was shot down. Did that happen this year or last year? The past few years really blend together. Regardless, I'm curious as to how this has anything really to do with flat Earth, so let's see what they've got.
What? It's on a balloon? Why is there a satellite on a balloon? It's always been that way. Flat earthers have been talking about this for a long time.
Ah, it's a balloon, so therefore that must be what satellites are. Were they not paying attention to how slowly it was going across the US and how low it was? Satellites don't do that. Satellites that I've seen, they move across the sky pretty quickly. The only ones that wouldn't do that would be geostationary satellites, because they stay in one place.
One thing that isn't really discussed in the mainstream is that NASA, of course we know, spends more money on helium than anyone else in the world.
So they say that, and they think that because NASA is using so much helium, it must just be used for balloons. But what they don't do is they don't look into it. Yes, sometimes NASA uses helium in balloons, but it also uses helium as a pressurizing agent. It's also used for getting rid of contaminants, because if you know your chemistry, you know that helium is a noble gas, and noble gases, they do not like reacting with things. And that's just a couple of the uses that they have for helium.
So why do you think NASA is the world's largest consumer of helium? Why would they send up balloons, these satellites, on balloons if they're in magical floating space, in the magical floating vacuum of space?
So there's a couple of different factors that we need to consider to answer that question. The first is cost. There is a different cost to putting something in orbit compared to just having it on a balloon. If you're putting something in orbit, it's going to cost a hell of a lot more, so that's factor number one. Factor number two is, what are you doing with it? If you're doing something where things need to be in zero gravity or maybe even above a certain height, then sure, you might want to put it in orbit. But if you're doing something like mapping something, then having it lower might be better, and if things are below a certain height, then it can't be in orbit. To use an analogy, it's a bit like buying a really fancy computer. If you're going to use it to just look at cat videos all day, then you don't need a fancy computer for that. A cheap computer will do just fine. In fact, you're wasting money if you buy a fancy computer for that. In fact, sometimes there may be advantages to having a cheap laptop rather than having a tower with RGB lighting that can run Cyberpunk 2077 in 4K with ray tracing. One of those isn't really going to be easy to take on holiday. For that, I'd rather have the laptop.
The idea that you would need some type of box that free falls in orbit around a ball is really just a fiction of imagination. That we don't need that at all. We don't utilize that.
So there are advantages of having satellites in orbit. If you go up higher, you cover a lot larger of an area. Also, not being in the atmosphere means that you can take far better pictures of the universe and get a much better idea of what the universe looks like, such as with Hubble and James Webb. As I said, it depends on what you're trying to do and what the most efficient way to get that done is.
Satellites have been on balloons since the 50s, and they've always been on balloons. They just lied about putting them in space. There's no evidence at all of satellites in space.
So the ISS, for example, you can do trigonometry to figure out the speed of that, and you find out that it is going really, really fast. Much faster than it could go in Earth's atmosphere. When it comes to getting something like satellite TV, you've got to point your satellite dish at a particular point in the sky. This is because there's a satellite in geostationary orbit that you're trying to receive data from. If they were using a balloon, it wouldn't be anywhere near as reliable because there's this thing called wind. You might have heard of it.
They would have to have a propulsion system. Even if you believe that the Earth is a ball, you must also believe that satellites cannot propel themselves without a source to thrust, okay? We know that they don't have engines on them. What's making them go around? They don't make sense.
So there are some satellites that do have engines on them for course correction and avoiding debris. They aren't to propel the satellite around the Earth, so how's it doing that? Well, the satellite is in constant freefall. So this is going to sound really, really weird, so try to stick with me here. So a satellite is moving really, really fast, but it's also being pulled towards the Earth. The Earth's gravitational pull on the satellite isn't going to make it come directly down, but it is going to alter its trajectory a little bit. Now, because satellites are really fast, by the time its trajectory has been altered by, let's say, 90 degrees, it's already made it to a point where it is just as far away from the Earth as it was when it started its journey to that point. Although that is assuming an orbit that isn't all that elliptical. But the simplified version is if you balance speed and gravity, yeah, you will have something in orbit that doesn't need to be powered, provided that it doesn't crash into anything.
If all these satellites are moving 17,500 miles an hour, some are moving this way, some are moving that way, it's common sense. There's 50,000 of them. They're supposed to hit each other eventually, but none of them hit each other. Come on, guys, wake up.
You can Google this, and you'll find that there have been crashes between satellites, and unintentional ones at that. There has also been some near misses, such as between an ESA and a Starlink satellite, because some satellites have collision avoidance systems on them. So congratulations, you actually identified that there is something that we should see happening, except you didn't do enough research to realise that it is actually happening.
Arthur C. Clarke in the 50s wrote a book theorizing about satellites falling around on Earth in an endless fall. Shortly after, we all of a sudden had satellites falling around the Earth.
Yeah, in the 50s, we knew what gravity was, and we knew how it worked.
Now think about it. The Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. It's orbiting in an elliptical orbit, speeding up and slowing down at 66,000 miles an hour. It's chasing the sun in another curved orbit, and we somehow have geostationary satellites. That's a satellite that stays above the same plot of land. So it's mimicking the spin, it's mimicking the orbit, it's speeding up and slowing down and staying over that same plot of land, and it's just falling in an ever-ending fall. That makes absolutely no sense.
So how does it do this? Well, firstly, you've got conservation of momentum, the Earth's biggest enemy. It will retain all of the momentum that was given to it by simply being on Earth. Secondly, you've got Earth's gravity. Earth's gravity will pull it along with it. And thirdly, you have the gravity of the solar system. The same gravity that is acting on the Earth and making it orbit the Sun is going to act on the satellite as well, causing that to also orbit the Sun. If you actually took the time to do the calculations, and to be fair I haven't done that, but if you did take the time to do the calculations and kept all of those things in mind, you would find that it stays in orbit no problem.
Now it's openly accepted that they're on balloons, but they're making it seem like it's a new thing. And this is the new way we're gonna launch satellites, is on balloons, and it's cheaper and it's just better. Like, we don't need them space ones no more. You know, people are starting to figure it out. That's why they're going back to balloons.
Except they don't just use balloons, they also use satellites in orbit.
And majority of all the transmissions we use for our cell phones or quote-unquote satellite TV are all ground towers. They all send transmissions from the ground tower to tower, admittedly at high elevations. And of course we have underground and undersea cables that make up 99.9% of all transmission. So this just a facade in people's mind that you have little metal boxes flying around giving you all of your data. None of that is real.
Okay, if satellite TV is using ground towers, then why do you have to point the satellite dish at a particular point in the sky? Because if you look where satellite dishes are pointed, you're not going to see a tower. They're pointed at the thing that they're receiving the signal from. So what is it pointed at? Anyway, I think this is a good place to end the video. They haven't really made any arguments in favour of flat Earth, have they? So far, all I've seen is space is fake and that's it. That doesn't mean that the Earth is flat. But I suppose they don't really have much to say about that because there isn't a lot to say about that, really. But there will still be another part. It should be the last part, so stick around for that. Anyway, leave a like and subscribe, leave comments and all that good stuff. I will see you in the next video. Between you and me... Wait, hold on. You ate all my popcorn!